Welcome to Weencast, Ween Off the Cuff, Riverdale, Episode 6, Season 7, Peep Show. I am your Ween. This episode of Riverdale is about being sexually insane, and I know what you're thinking. Isn't every episode of Riverdale about being sexually insane? Somehow, this episode was even more about being sexually insane. But it doesn't start that way. It starts with the aftermath of Dr. Werther's editorial about how comic books are the seduction of the innocent and how they're all being burned and confiscated. Jughead is sad about this. And he's also sad about it because he's noticed that Pep Comics, the company where he works, has been plagiarizing stories from the book November County by famous science fiction pulp author Brad Rayberry. Jughead, incapable of letting injustice go, vows to contact Brad Rayberry and tell him about the plagiarism, even though this runs directly contrary to Jughead's interests of continuing to work at the comic book company. But that's Jughead. That's what I respect about him. Archie, suffering under the auspices of mustachioed Uncle Frank, are in the garage talking about how Archie's failed at life, about his dad, and about how he needs to apologize to his mom for being a delinquent teenage loser. That wasn't a Trump voice on purpose. I was yawning. And that night, Archie goes up to his room, depressed, takes a shower. What he doesn't know is that Betty's at her bedroom window looking into his bedroom, and she sees him in a towel, and she looks at his abs, and she sees where his penis would be. And she goes absolutely pussy delirious. And so the next day she rushes to school to ask Veronica about sexo. But Veronica's like, yeah, Betty, the fact of the matter is I'm a virgin due to back in time reasons. We're all virgins again. Obviously, Veronica doesn't mention the back in time stuff because she doesn't remember about the past, future, 67 years in the past and the future where we used to be, and it was modern, it was the past, it was the future. But she does confirm that all our heroes are virgins again. Betty also talks about how she thinks Veronica is so sexy. And she wants to become like Veronica, which I think is very homoerotic of her. And Veronica suggests that she should start wearing lingerie and that Betty should come over to her house to have a lingerie party with her where Betty tries on all Veronica's lingerie and poses in it for Veronica because Veronica is not only bisexual, she's fucked in the head and she gets off on playing weird mind games with people. And I say good for her, girl boss. Cheryl, speaking of weird mind games, Cheryl has finished reading The Cost of Pepper, and she goes to find Tony and talk about it, and she can't still admit that she's gay, but she does say that the girls on the cover are hot, and Tony's like, oh, okay, alright, I see where this is going. But Cheryl immediately makes an excuse that she can't date right now because she's restarting the cheer team anyway. So it just can't happen. And of course, you see where this is going, where Tony's idea is going to be, yeah, obviously. Archie's promising to get better at school. He's swearing his fealty to Principal Featherhead. If Principal Featherhead's not honestly that interested. He wants to talk to Uncle Frank because creeps creep together. And it turns out he wants Uncle Frank to restart the basketball team now that the war is over and become the basketball coach. And Uncle Frank wants Archie on the team, but Archie's like, you told me I needed to study. Also, I don't have any more confidence. So Frank forces Archie to be the water boy. And so now we can see that we're going to get back into sports because we haven't had a lot of sports, and so much of Riverdale, especially in the early seasons was football, the epic highs and lows. But we haven't had sports in such a long time, but basketball teams getting restarted, cheer teams getting restarted. Fuck, I'm sleepy. Cheer teams getting restarted. Tony comes to cheer tryouts. Duh. And she does a super sexy cheer routine. And Cheryl goes pussy delirious. And then she says, and I quote, "Razz my berries and put them in a jelly jar." Her berries are razzed and they've been put in a jelly jar. And so, of course, she appoints Tony to a tenure track position on the cheer team. But Cheryl's factotum on the cheer team objects, and you'll never guess who Cheryl's factotum on the cheer team is. It's Evelyn Evernever. Long-term fans of the show will recall that Evelyn was the fake daughter, actually wife, of Chad Michael Murray when he had the organ-stealing cult in the Sisters of Quiet Mercy, and then later he had the Evel Knievel rocket cult, but that was just a one-off thing. So this fact that Evelyn is back, the fact that she, like Principal Featherhead and Dr. Werther's, is once again a villain, as you'll hear later as I get into the plot of the episode some more. This is important. This is important. All our villains are returning all at once this season, all as villains again, and this is like just pure. That's pure juice from a comic book standpoint. When you get used to the one at a time, the villains, and then for like the final crisis, they all come back together in some kind of like Injustice League. Fuck. Anyway, back at the plot of the episode. Veronica's sitting on her huge bed, eating chocolates, and watching Betty put on lingerie. It's not queerbaiting, it's saving the world. And she makes Betty put on the lingerie and come out and be like, "Betty, show me how you look in lingerie." And Betty's like, "I don't feel confident." And so Veronica takes her to the mirror and makes her recite a mantra about being a beautiful young woman in the flower of her womanhood and a sexy seductress. And now Betty has confidence and she feels sexy. Jughead hunts down Brad Rayberry, who for some reason lives near Riverdale. And Jughead reports the plagiarism and does some hero worship with him. And Brad Rayberry feels confused about it, which is fair. At Thornhill, Cheryl and Evelyn have a meeting, and Evelyn starts to object to Tony being on the cheer team. And you're like, is Evelyn homophobic or racist? And Cheryl has the same question. She confronts Evelyn about the racism, and Evelyn's like, no, don't worry, I'm homophobic. I'm scared to shower with Tony because I've heard she's a, quote, total lessy. And Cheryl gets upset and says, "You're spreading nasty rumors about Tony. She's not a secret homosexual. I'm going to fire you from the cheer team if you keep fucking with me, Evelyn." Because Cheryl's a girl boss. Meanwhile, Tony herself is hanging out at the Beatnik Coffee Bar, Speakeasy Basement, Biker Bar, White Worm, whatever the name of it is now this season, the Beatnik Bar, Coffee Bean, whatever. And Lizzo, the hot lesbian greaser girl, is making fun of her about how she's joined the cheer team, which is lame, to try and hit on Cheryl, which is fair because Cheryl's hot. And Tony points out that it's not just about getting laid. It's also that Tony is the first black cheerleader at Riverdale High. So it's integration too. And Lizzo's like, okay, if it's political, I respect that. Archie's suffering because Uncle Frank stole his car to continue punishing him. Uncle Frank, as usual, sucks, but at least right now, in this timeline, he didn't used to fucking work for Blackwater. which is a real thing that happened. Uncle Frank was a mercenary. But of course, we don't know in what war he did his war crimes because that was the war in Uzbekistan. Veronica goes straight to Betty at the beginning of school to be like, Betty, are you wearing lingerie? Which is like, come on. But Betty didn't have the confidence. She's afraid to change in the locker rooms and have everybody think that she's slutty because she wears sexy underwear. And Veronica condemns gaslighting, which is fucking ironic coming from Veronica. One of the gaslightiest girl bosses to ever gatekeep. She's gaslighting right now because she keeps telling Betty that she's doing all these weird things to her to help her get a boyfriend when it's obviously just weird fetish activity for Veronica. But Veronica wants to help Betty get a boyfriend. But then when Betty says she has a crush on Archie, Veronica's a little upset because she still also kind of wants to get with Archie, but she blew that up a couple episodes ago, and then she had a brief fling with Jughead. Just so embarrassing. And so she pulls it together to encourage Betty to date Archie, but when Betty asks Archie out, he's like, "Oh, gee, Betty, I'd love to take you to the movies, but I'm just too busy with all the stuff I'm doing for Uncle Frank." And Betty's crushed, so Veronica suggests they rebound um, by getting new boyfriends from Stonewall Prep, which is confirmed to exist in this timeline, and be near Riverdale, and just get with some hot private school boys, which runs in direct contravention with what I know about private school boys, which is that they're not hot. They're 14-year-olds in ties. But okay. Alright, whatever. Meanwhile, in the sports plot lines, Archie is suffering. He's being humiliated by Julian at basketball practice because Uncle Frank is forcing him to act as the water boy. And Evelyn is creeping around the girls' locker room and searching Tony's things. And she finds the cost of pepper in Tony's locker. And Tony confronts her. And Evelyn says, I believe this is verbatim, "Are you gaga for girls?" Are you gaga for girls? are you are you are you gaga for girls? Are, are you gaga for girls? Are you? No. I had to stop. I have to stop. Anyway, the point is, Tony's like, it's none of your business, Evelyn. And Evelyn's like, well, Cheryl totally defended you and said that you weren't. And Tony's like, oh no. Drama with Cheryl. That's my kryptonite. But we can't follow up on that yet because we have to go back to this stupid Jughead plot for a little bit. Jughead gets his comic book printed and he's like, oh my god, I'm an author now, OMG. Whoa. Um, but then Brad Rayberry bursts into Pep Comics and is like, hey, you stole my stories. Plagiarism. And so Jughead moderates between his editor and Brad Rayberry and figures out how to get Brad Rayberry paid for his work that got plagiarized, and everybody's happy. And so Brad and Jughead go to Pops together. They talk about their daddy issues, and Jughead reveals that in this timeline, he lives all alone in a train car because FP fled to Toledo because a few years ago he was involved in a big robbery. A big robbery, yes, and he had to flee town. And Jughead hasn't heard from him since. So Brad Rayberry encourages Jughead's literary ambitions and basically volunteers to be Jughead's new dad, and encourages Jughead to write a new short story and write about FP. Um, Meanwhile, miserable Archie thinks about practicing basketball, but no, he can't bring himself to do it emotionally. And it's good because he's not going to have time to play basketball because now Uncle Frank has also forced him to get a job at Pops, being a gas station attendant. So the humiliations continue. And so the next day at school, Jughead shows his comic book to his friends, Ben and Dilton, and they're super excited. Um, but Tony is very upset that Cheryl tried to protect her from homophobia by denying that she was gay to someone who was obviously homophobic. But Tony, I guess not aware that it's the 1950s, is like, I'm not ashamed of who I am. You don't get to speak for me about my identity. I'm over you, Cheryl. But then I guess that was a psyop, because what happens then is that Cheryl's like, "Oh no, I guess it's time for me to admit I am attracted to women, and also specifically to you, Tony." And Tony's like, "Oh, okay, then I am still into you, JK." Um, and that's Riverdale. Jughead goes to visit Bray Radbury, Brad Radbury, Brad Rayberry, and gives him his story to read. He's like, "Brad, can you read my short story for me now that you're my new dad?" But while he's there, he sees an unpublished manuscript of the Jupiter Journals. This is totally not the Martian Chronicles. Um, and he steals it because Jughead is fucking stupid. But that's just a little break, because that gives us time then for Cheryl and Tony to go on a date to the beatnik greaser biker coffee bar house basement, and they talk about how Kevin is gay. No way. And Cheryl talks about how she found out about being gay because she has a beloved aunt Carol who left their family to go be a writer in Greenwich Village and was referred to as I don't remember the exact words, but like something like a deviant sapphic seductress by Cheryl's mom, um, which makes sense. And so that was when Cheryl realized that she was gay, but also that obviously her family would hate her if she came out. But she always kind of wished she could be like Aunt Carol and move to Greenwich Village and have girlfriends. And Tony shares a story about how she always knew she was bisexual. Um, but then when she was 13, her parents caught her making out with the neighbor Glenda. Not Glenn, but Glenda. Um, and she was kicked out of her house, but she was able to move into her grandma with her grandma, who accepts her. And honestly, this conversation, despite the cheesy pop culture reference parts, is really nice, perfectly solid, uh, cute scene of the two characters bonding about their struggles with an unaccepting world, and very nicely acted by Vanessa Morgan and Madeline Petch. So it all paid off. It all paid off. I'm sure it's going to be fine, and there's going to be no more super cringe Riverdale accounts of homophobia. I think it'll be fine. Meanwhile, Archie is suffering as a gas station attendant, being tormented by fucking no eyebrows Julian. And Betty and Ronnie are inside Pops on their private school boy date. And the boys are talking about Riverdale Grandstand, which is the TV show that Betty's parents have on the local TV network, where it's like American Bandstand and there's like teens dance on there. And they're like, "Betty, why don't you dance on Riverdale Grandstand?" But she's like, "Oh, it's just so much work." But I've seen the promo for next week's episode, and it's about Riverdale Grandstand. So that's called foreshadowing in the business. Archie is miserable, but he's nice to. He has Pops. Pop is there to be nice to Archie and give him some coffee and thank him for working hard and talk to him about his paw and about how his dad was the best basketball player Riverdale's ever seen, and it's a real shame that he had to lay down his life for freedom in the Korean War, because we can know what war it was that Archie's dad died in. We just can't know what war it was that Archie died in, but Archie's fine. That didn't happen. That was in the past future, 67 years ago in the past and the future. Jughead read the Jupiter Journals by Brad Rayberry, and it's incredible. He's shocked it's unpublished. He rushes to talk to Brad Rayberry about it and be like, "You have to publish it." And Brad Rayberry's like, "Bro, you fucking you fucking stole my story. That's very uncool. You came to me. We met because you were like, I don't want these guys to plagiarize you, and then you stole my shit. You stole my shit from me that I was keeping private." And so Brad Rayberry casts Jughead away. And Jughead has already burnt through yet another father figure because he fucking sucks. I love Jughead. Betty is very depressed about the private school boy date. She didn't get anywhere with him and she didn't want to have sex with him. She just wants to have sex with Archie. So Veronica suggests, well, maybe if Archie doesn't have time to go out on dates, they should talk on the phone. But Betty's like, oh, I can see into his room. He doesn't have a phone in his room. And Veronica says, you can see into his room? Do you ever see him nude? Um, and yes, obviously she sees him nude, so they make an appointment to engage in voyeurism. But Archie doesn't have time to think about voyeurism because Julian is tormenting him again and disses his dad's basketball record. So they have to fight physically, and now Archie's in real trouble. But Archie's mom finally stands up for Archie. She says, Uncle Frank, I'm going to handle this. You leave Archie alone. And so Archie and his mom talk out his issues. The real reason he doesn't play basketball is because he's too sad about the death of his father to play anymore. It makes him, he played basketball so much with his dad. They had so much fun together. It was the thing that they did together. It's too sad to play anymore. Also, he feels bad about what if he sucks and his dad would be disappointed in him. Um, and this part is also sad and also perfectly well acted by KJ Appa and Molly Ringwald. And what's nice is that Mary assures Archie that his dad would be proud of him no matter what, and that Uncle Frank has been too harsh on him, and she's going to make Uncle Frank ease up. And that's good. This is good for Archie. He doesn't deserve to suffer. Meanwhile, at cheerleading practice, Cheryl appoints Tony the new top of the pyramid. And Evelyn is enraged because she used to always be at the top of the pyramid. Cheryl verbally lacerates her, humiliates her. It's good stuff. And afterwards, in the locker room, Tony's like, wow, Cheryl, thanks for standing up for me with Evelyn. Do you mind if I show you my gratitude? And they kiss at the locker with like a really bright light behind them, so you know it's romance. So that's good. We put a nice bow on that storyline for this episode so far. But not the Archie, Veronica, Betty voyeurism storyline. That's still going. That night, Betty and Veronica spy on Archie, and Veronica says some insane lines that I absolutely must commend Camila Mendez for being able to say even once without losing her mind. The oblique references that she makes to Archie's dick are incredible. The way that she connects Archie's dick to making references to Rear Window. Incredible. Absolutely is a star turn by Camille Mendez here. And of course, as Veronica and Betty are pressed to the window being horny over Archie, he notices they're there and is like, hey, what the fuck? And he closes the blinds. And so they're both humiliated and guilty, and the next day at school they're scared Archie's going to be mad at them. But when Archie approaches, he doesn't seem mad, but he does ask to talk just to Betty in private. And he admits to her that actually he's turned on by voyeurism and objectification, and he wants to do a mutual strip show since they'll both be in their bedrooms. So they plan for a midnight meetup, and Betty plans to wear the lingerie. and empowered by this potential sexual satisfaction, Archie forces his way onto the basketball team, humiliates No Eyebrows Julian, and reclaims his manhood from Uncle Frank, which is good. But in a last little grace note on the Jughead comic book storyline, the school secretary confiscates Dilton's comic book and turns it into Dr. Werther's and points out that Jughead's name is right on the cover. A student at Riverdale High is the author of this obscene and violent comic book. And so we know that Jughead has, as usual, sowed the seeds for his own destruction, not merely ruined the relationship with his new father figure, but set himself up to presumably get expelled from school or something, tormented by Dr. Werther's, the same way that Dr. Werther's once tormented him when Dr. Werther's was the principal of Stonewall Prep. I don't remember what his name was, but in the end, he threw himself out the window to die instead of letting the cops get him because he was a serial killer, obviously. Um, Final note of the episode: Archie and Betty at midnight go to their respective bedroom windows. They have a lengthy, a lengthy strip scene. Like, it really goes on, and you really get lost in it after a while. Like, it went on, and I spent more time than I think I ever have before pondering if they let KJ Appa have body hair before now, because very noticeably, thanks to the um the camera work on this episode, KJ slash Archie does have visible chest hair. He does have visible like happy trail hair. Um, and we see it. It's shown to us. It's placed before our eyes for scopophilic pleasure. Um, and the scene went on for so long that it was like a little bit of a jump scare when, of course, in their respective bedrooms burst, on Archie's side, Uncle Frank, and on Betty's side, her father, catching them both in the act of being sexual deviants. Cliffhanger ending. Um, thrilling stuff. And so next week, the promo makes it seem like everybody's going to be on Riverdale Grandstand, and then Betty is going to do some kind of obscene or pornographic dance routine that is going to get them all canceled. And her parents are going to freak out, which I'm excited for. Okay, sounds great. Excellent. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Um, I mean, this episode, what I appreciated most about this episode, besides the fact that it was number one, Riverdale, number two, genuinely entertaining, number three, had some like legit good scenes, number four, had some just bad shit scenes, was that it was just a little bit crazier than all the previous episodes this season, because this season's been kind of a slow burn by Riverdale standards. Even last week's crazy comic book episode, it was still like the craziness was in the context of the comic book format, you know, and most of our characters so far have had motivations that kind of relate to the actual human condition and like behaviors that somewhat follow from their circumstances. But in this episode, in the kind of like they're boiling the frog way, I think they turned up the heat just a little bit to make all of our characters just a little bit crazier and behave just a little bit weirder. And it feels a lot like when you're going up the hill on the roller coaster and you can hear the like chain going kerchunk, 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 kerchunk. And then right when you get to the top, the kerchunking ceases, but you're not over the hill yet. You can't see the drop is coming, but it's on the way, and then I'm imagining that we're on the precipice now. We're on the precipice now, and they could theoretically drop us farther than anyone has ever been dropped. I don't know, obviously, what the effect of the WGA strike is going to be on Riverdale's broadcasting and on the whatever episodes as yet remain unfinished. Um, Obviously, I want all episodes of Riverdale to exist, but obviously, more than that, I would like the writers of Riverdale to be appropriately compensated for what I can only assume is a tremendous, like, life disaffirming, soul draining labor that they have to put everything in themselves into producing this content. So we'll see. But as far as I know right now, there's no breaks or anything scheduled even before the strike in terms of like they're just going to keep broadcasting episodes of Riverdale until the summer ends. And if that still happens, that's kind of terrifying because I at least am used to, mid-season break of a couple weeks if not like a month where yes, there's like a mid-season cliffhanger, but there's also like time to recover your health. I don't know what it will do to the viewers of Riverdale if we really have an unbroken streak of Riverdale episodes going on for like 8 to 10 weeks unbroken. It's it could cost us everything, but I'm ready. I'm ready to give everything for the cause, not just of Riverdale, but the cause of appropriate, fair compensation for the laborers who produce Riverdale. Um, I salute you, authors of Riverdale. I stand in solidarity with the absolute fucking sickos who come up with this shit. Final note. Like I said earlier, I'm really intrigued about this uh, thing where they're bringing back all the previous season villains because Clifford is back, Hal is back, Evelyn is back, the Dr. Werthers, who is the principal of Stonewall High, is back. Principal Featherhead is the warden from Leopold and Loeb Juvenile Detention Center. Um, Penelope is back. That's we haven't seen Percival back yet, but I think it's very possible Percival could come back. Satan also we haven't seen, but obviously Satan could come back at any time. Um, so that's all. That really signals to me. Number one, it's just funny to see them again, right? It's just funny to see them again. Number two, the possibility that they all team up to be a league of Riverdale villains, titillating and sorceling, phenomenal. Um, the idea that possibly this season will end in a final battle of good versus evil, our Riverdale heroes against our Riverdale villains. Incredible. Incroyable. Knowing also that Mark Consuelos has teased that he's going to return for an episode and that the episode is about the men's wrestling team. uh, Hello. But that's hard to even talk about because it's so thrilling as a possibility. Um, yeah, I feel with this episode we're truly on the precipice. They've kind of let us grow complacent with these slow burn 1950s episodes that sort of resemble normal television with regular construction. And I think that we are about to get blasted with the fuck beam. And not only is that necessary, that's why I come to Riverdale. So, Godspeed. Godspeed, Riverdale. Thank you. Uh, This has been Ween Off the Cuff. I am your Ween.